Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the gardening question and answer video that I do most Sundays of every month. The first Sunday of every month I do a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're proud of. If you want to send in photos for that, the email address is right here. Like I say, I just accumulate those emails all month long, and that video will be the first Sunday in June. If you're wondering where those photos end up. The rest of the Sundays I do question and answer videos. You can ask questions down below this video and I will pick from those next week. I had a ton of questions because it's been 2 weeks since there was a question and answer video, and I picked quite a few, but there were more. If I don't get enough for next week, I'll go back and pull a few more of those. I'm shooting this on May 10th, Sunday, right before you see it, and you can see covers on things behind me. We had a frost last night. I got no frost in this backyard, but there is frost on my windshield of my pickup in front of the house. So there was some frost in the area. It looks like very, very spotty. I would imagine out in the rural areas around the city of Raleigh, though, there's quite a bit of frost. So I'm glad I used some precaution. What else? Before we get to the questions, I just want to thank everyone for the channel has grown super fast this last couple months, and coming up on 70,000 subscribers or something like that, and 80% of the views on this channel are actually from non-subscribers. It's a little stat that I can look at, and so a lot of folks watch and aren't subscribed, and so but anyway, it's coming up on 70,000. I appreciate everyone. Thank you for joining the channel over the last couple of months, and thanks to all the people who have been here for 3 years. I've got some of the same folks commenting on videos 3 years later. I really appreciate the family of folks that I've put together with this channel, who have come together, and the comments are always great, great to read, and it's just a super positive place, which gardening should be, right? And for those of you who are new to the channel, real quickly before I get to the questions, on my homepage of my channel, if you go to YouTube, look up HortTube, and go to my actual channel page, there's little tabs, and one of them says playlist. If you go to that playlist tab, I have the videos on this channel organized into playlist. If you live in zone 5, and the majority of my videos are for the Southeast, I understand that, but if you live in zone 5, I actually have a playlist for zone 5. Every plant that I've ever covered that will grow in your area, so you can kind of cut to the chase and go just to that plant group. If you're just looking for flowering shrubs, there's a playlist for that. There's a playlist for foundation plants. There's a playlist for all kinds of different things, but you can go through those if you're interested in propagation, and a lot of people found my channel from propagation videos. The propagation videos are in a playlist as well. So, and there'll be more of those this year once I get this greenhouse going. So, okay, enough. Let's get to some questions. Somebody asked me about planting perennials, specifically milkweed, over their septic field, and milkweed does root pretty deep. It's probably one I would avoid. I had a septic field at the previous house before I moved up here, and everything that I had in that septic field I did in a raised bed, and mostly annuals, but that would be my vegetable plants, where my raised bed vegetable gardening was over my septic field, and so those things were annuals, so like the tomato plants were coming out. Even if they were aggressive, they had an end season to them. The other thing I had over that septic field was things like blueberries, which are super shallow rooted. There were some azaleas over there, super shallow rooted. So I was picking things very specific, and they were all in a raised bed. So not only was the septic gravel down, probably 18 inches, or somewhere right in there, there was also soil on top. I don't recommend anybody put anything on your septic field. I don't want that liability. You didn't hear anything about it from me. But I chose to only plant annual things and a couple shallow rooted things over mine, and that would be all I picked. Okay. Somebody asked me about spacing on olive, martini, Elaeagnus. I did a video on those at the old house, those were probably planted about 4 feet apart, but I tend to crowd everything when I'm in a hurry to get something done. I think this person had wanted to put them like 8 feet apart. I think 6 is probably the appropriate distance for them to close the gap between them in a reasonable amount of time. That's true with most screening plants that get into that 10 to 18 foot range. Probably 6 feet is probably the appropriate spacing. A little bit more on conifers like green giants and leylands, if you ever wanted to use leylands. But leafy evergreen things, 6 feet is probably the right spacing For ones that get over 10 feet tall, ones that stay below 10 feet tall, you may have to come in more, more like 4 feet, maybe 5 feet. Let's see. Somebody asked me about what soil to use for planting fruit plants in containers, and I'll use a potting soil. It can be cocoa coir or whatever potting soil you want to use, but then I cut it with some pine bark. And if you can't find pine bark soil conditioner, which is the fine ground pine bark, you probably can find pine bark mini nuggets, and mini nuggets would be fine if they're reasonable size. Pick the largest pieces out, but you can mix that pine bark in maybe 1/3 to 1/2 with your potting soil, and that will help drain that soil. When you pull your fruit plant out of the container to plant it, you'll notice that the bark, they're being grown in bark, and that's the preferred soil. But if you grow them in all bark, you have to water them almost every day, because that's what nurseries do. That bark drains too well, and so there's a balancing act here where the potting soil will keep them too wet. The pine bark would drive you nuts because you'd be watering them literally every day, and you'd have to fertilize them a lot too, because the fertilizer flushes every time the soil flushes. So that mix allows to, a reasonable amount of watering instead of too much watering or never any watering, somewhere in the middle. So 50-50 pine bark and potting soil. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me about when to prune rosemary, lavender, and salvia, I guess, in an herb garden. Rosemary you can prune after they flower in the spring. You can prune them before they flower if you don't care about the flowers. But you can prune rosemary anytime between, let's say April 15th and maybe July 31st. You want to give it about 6 weeks, 8 weeks before the last frost date, cutting them. You wouldn't want to cut them once August comes around, I wouldn't cut them. Same thing with the lavender. You can cut the lavender after the first flowering, and you can cut it anytime between then and about August 1st. And salvia, same thing. So you don't have to wait for the salvia to bloom. It'll bloom on new growth. So I've got several salvias back here, and I've been keeping the flowers cut off of them just to try to encourage the plants to get a little larger, before I let them start blooming. But salvia can be pruned anytime again up until about August 1st. And then those perennials like that, those perennial herbs, I don't want to prune them after then, because they'll put on a ton of new growth in the late summer, early fall, and then they'll get zapped by the cold. Okay, somebody asked me about raking in fertilizer. They just see me throwing the fertilizer out and not raking it in, and that's exactly what I do. I've got the mulch here, so it's getting trapped between pieces of mulch. If you don't have a mulch space, then you may want to rake it in, just so water doesn't wash it off. Or if you have a sloped space, that has a lot of slope to it, you might want to rake it in. But otherwise, I don't see any reason to. And I always get that question about maybe pulling the mulch back and then using the fertilizer. And some people have to because their dogs will eat the fertilizer. I understand that. But the less you disturb the soil, the better. The mulch is a weed barrier, and if you go in and start pulling it back and then fertilizing and then pushing the mulch back, I guarantee you've exposed weed seeds in that process, and you're gonna have a flush of weeds from it. Okay, somebody has their encore azaleas in too much shade and wants to know when to move them. They're in zone 9, so definitely in zone 9. I'd probably wait till fall at this point. We're well into May now. I probably wouldn't stress them by moving them. If this person had asked me in zone 6 or 7 or maybe even 8A, I would have told them to go ahead and move them now. But down in zone 9 at this point, you're already in summer basically. I probably would wait until the fall to move them. Encore azaleas do need more sun than traditional azaleas. The ones I have in this yard are full and compact. There's ones under this cover right here that are blooming, but they're getting a good amount of direct sun every day. I have the perfect spot here for them where they're going to get tons and tons of morning sun, and you can see the sun, since I've been talking, starting to move down here as it's coming over this house. They'll be in the sun from 10 a.m. until almost 3, and they're nice and full and compact because of that. Okay, somebody asked me about umbrella-shaped crepe myrtles. They see lots of the new varieties of crepe myrtles are all V-shapes, upright varieties. Almost all the new introductions are, or dwarfs, tiny little shrubby crepe myrtles. And then the only one they see with the umbrella shape is white. Well, that's Natchez. Natchez is still the best of all crepe myrtles that were ever introduced, in my opinion, because it has all things crepe myrtle. It has the smooth, beautiful red bark. It has disease resistance. It has the umbrella shape, and it just blooms beautifully, you know, out on these big, beautiful long branches, and it gets big. You know, it's everything a crepe myrtle should be. The other one though that will do that is muskogee. It's a lavender pink. It's one of those that some people will call purple and some people will call lavender and some people will call it pink. The color's kind of somewhere in between, but I love muskogee. Muskogee and Natchez are very similar. They're almost hard to tell apart when there's no leaves on them. And I can usually, there's a lot of varieties of crepe myrtles that I can tell without leaves on them, you know, what they are. Tuscarora doesn't weep so much, but it does have kind of horizontal branching and ends up with that kind of umbrella look. And it's kind of a watermelon red. We called Tuscarora red before there were real red crepe myrtles. So it's almost red. But that's another one that has the look, but it's not as weepy. Okay, somebody asked about screening plants that get larger than 10 feet, and they didn't include a zone or anything, so I really couldn't help them specifically, but that goes back to my playlist thing. When I talked about the playlist earlier, there's also a screening plant playlist, and so I think you could find, I probably have done 50 plants that grow larger than 10 feet that are screening plants on this channel, maybe more, I don't know. I think there's 730, 740 videos on this channel at this point, and probably 400 of those are individual plant varieties. I'm guessing. Somebody asked me, the Coosa dogwood hasn't leafed out yet, and they're in western Kentucky. This spring has been so slow in ramping up. We got off to a weird start back in January where everything was jumping way early. I was taking so many photos on Instagram that just things that were blooming super early, and then that went to a weird sudden crawl around the middle of March, and it's been cool since then. But if you're deciding whether a plant has not survived the winter, I don't think this is a good year to have made that decision by mid-May. I still have a cover on something here, May 10th here, which is 4 weeks past my frost-free date. So not a good year to make that determination. I would probably wait until June before you can figure out if your Coosa dogwood's dead. Somebody asked me about revitalizing an old landscape. I get this question all the time. Where do you start when you're revitalizing something? And this is what I came into here. And I just started hacking away on things immediately. The only way to get moving, and this is the answer to everything, is that I do a little bit of work out here every day, and it moves the ship forward. You know, and it doesn't seem like it that day, but over a month or 2 or 3 months, it does move the needle. And you know, I had limbs hanging out halfway back here, almost to these covers right here, and I pushed all that stuff back. And you know, there's noxious weeds growing all the way around this fence. 2 days ago, I went through and started digging them out all the way around. I had already done that side, but this side over here had terrible noxious weeds growing in here. They're the background for my videos. You know, it looks terrible, but they're gone along that fence. It took it took hours with a pickaxe. If you've got large overgrown shrubs on a new landscape, cut them in half. If they're not making you happy, cut them in half. And if they don't fill back in and look good, out they go. But that's the way I would come into a new landscape with overgrown stuff, is I would cut the shrubs in half that I thought I might want to keep and let them see if they flush back out. And if they do, great. I probably would thin the trees. They said they had a lot of trees. You know, that's going to limit your ability to garden. So some thinning of some trees. We do like trees, but you don't necessarily want them, you know, this close together in a yard, or you're not going to be able to garden. And then, you know, from there, you just have to chip away at it. I would imagine moving into an existing landscape like that, you're probably going to have some, you know, noxious weeds that have seeded themselves in. The birds, you know, move all that stuff around. And so that's been part of this job back here, is a daily, you know, hour or two of moving it forward. And then you'll look back on a month or 2 months later and you'll be amazed the amount of progress you made. But cut the big overgrown stuff in half, and if it comes back out, great. If it doesn't, yank it out and plant something you like. Okay, somebody asked me about pinching petunias. I pinch most of my annuals early on in the season. So petunias and anything that is an annual thing that blooms all summer long, I will do a little bit of pinching on them early just to encourage some additional growth on them. That would be petunias or literally anything. I'll go through maybe once a week here, and all of my all summer flowering perennials early in the spring, like I said, like the salvias, I'll take the flowers off. The butterfly bushes, when the first round of flowers on them, I typically will take those buds off before they open up and just encourage as much full green growth as I can. And when it comes into bloom, then it'll be spectacular rather than having 3 or 4 leggy little flowers on it. So I do it on a lot of things, and annuals are right at the top of the list. And then I let them go. After 1 or 2 cuttings on them, I let them go. And then somebody asked me about, they got some 1-gallon trees and wanted to know about staking them. If you've got little wispy 1-gallon tiny trees that you buy and put in the ground, you probably do need to stake them with bamboo the first season and make sure you're keeping them as straight as you possibly can. Those thin whip trees, a lot of times propagators will propagate trees very close together to encourage them to race one another so that they can get some height on them before they begin potting them. That also creates a little bit of more height and not enough girth to hold up the top of the trees. So they know they're going to stake them when they pot them. And so you need to know the same thing. If you buy a tall, wispy little tree in a 1-gallon container or 3-quart container, you're probably going to have to stake it for a year, maybe more. But occasionally take the tape off or whatever you've got it tied and tie it in a different spot. Make sure you're not girdling the tree. So that's enough for this week. Again, I appreciate everyone who's joined the channel and all the folks that have been here with me for 3 years. I really appreciate it. This space I moved into, Holly, she's eating grass right here behind. Can you guys see she's eating grass? Oh my gosh. And my dog eats grass. For those of you who just joined the channel, I got a dog that eats grass. Yes, she's in the frame eating grass. I don't know how long she's been doing it. But again, thanks for watching. Ask questions down below, and next week I'll do the same thing.